Hello and welcome, everyone. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're being joined by Michael Fiore, and he's going to be discussing his new documentary, Veselka, The Rainbow on the Corner at the Center of the World. Before I hand it over to Michael, if you're not familiar with village preservation, just want to give you a quick introduction. We were founded in 1980, and we work to document, celebrate, and preserve the special architectural and cultural heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've secured landmark designation for more than 1,250 buildings in our neighborhood and over zoning protection for over 100 blocks. We also host over 75 free programs like this throughout the year. And that's why I ask you if you could take a moment to scan the QR code on your screen there, because we are a members-based organization. It's our members that help make this work possible. So if you do have a moment, please go ahead to scan that QR code, or you can head over to villagepreservation.org/donate. Little Zoom protocol, please feel free throughout Michael's presentation. If you do have questions, please go ahead and drop those into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And we will be asking those questions to Michael at the end of his presentation. But the chat is open. So if Michael asks you any questions and wants any responses, you'll be free to do so in the chat. But now let me go ahead and introduce Michael. So Michael Fiore is a New York-based writer, producer, director. As with his previous documentary, Floyd Norman, An Animated Life, that was on Netflix, TCM, Criterion Channel, Michael turns his lens towards people who stand up for a cause, the marginalized, and those who are dismissed amidst power. Fiore first became acquainted with Veselka in the late 1990s as a film student at the neighboring NYU Tisch School of Arts. And Michael is joining us this evening from an office right above Veselka. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will now disappear into the shadows. Take it away, Michael.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me. Thank you, William. It's a special privilege and honor to be with you all, not only given the story that I'm telling with Veselka, but also as a NYU alumni. This neighborhood, was my home for 4 years, and Veselka was my second kitchen. So it's a pleasure to share this movie with you all. The documentary just was released at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival last weekend, and the screenings were wonderful. The audience applauded in unexpected places, laughed in unexpected places, and I hope you all will take an opportunity to come to the Village East starting February 23rd to see it on the big screen in New York City. The story that we're telling is a 70-year-old story. So for those in the audience who are familiar with Veselka, you may have lived through some of those decades and experienced the change in the storefront from being a small newspaper stand candy store to becoming the, as Tom Birchard, the second generation owner, would say, a food factory, which I got to witness over the course of filming for a little over a year. The movie focuses initially on that 70-year history, and shows the three generations from Vladimir Darmaqual starting Veselka as that candy store in 1954 as a refuge for Ukrainians displaced by Russian oppression during and after World War II. His own family came here in 1950. So it was the story of this restaurant is somewhat rooted in war. And when I first approached Tom and Jason Birchard in November of 2021, I had come to them kind of knowing a general history of the three generations of ownership, So I knew what I wanted to tell was a story about fathers and sons. And then as they kind of sat on this idea of, oh, do we want cameras in our restaurant? Do we want a filmmaker here at all, potentially all hours of the day for weeks or months on end? They sat on it for a while, and then the war started to percolate. And in January of 2022, we all were getting news on TV that this war may happen any day. And so, given the way that this Veselka started in 1954, I said to Tom and Jason, I think if there's a time to tell your story, now is the time. And history repeats itself, unfortunately, and it looks like we might be in that situation here with this war. And so Tom and Jason were very thoughtful about it, because none of us want to exploit what was going on, but we did understand, we all were in agreement that the parallels were dynamic enough and dramatic enough if the war started that, this might be the time to tell their story. So long story short, we started filming on the 11th day of the war. And if you see the movie, you'll see that Act One is really that day. And it was a long day. We filmed for, I think, 18 hours on that first day. And one of the challenges was that, as you can imagine, not many people at the restaurant really wanted to talk to me. A majority of the staff are Ukrainian or Polish, some are Russian. And um, I was very sensitive to that. And I never wanted to be a part of the movie. I never really wanted to, be on camera. But there was a point when I was starting to realize midway through that day that really nobody was willing to share their stories. I thought it was time to take the opportunity to kind of make that known to the viewing audience, that they need to start seeing that people are telling me no. And then from a dramatic point of view, you as an audience are wondering, well, where is this movie going to go? Because this guy keeps getting no's for answers. And what begins to happen over the course of a couple months is people began to feel very comfortable with me. They understood that I was not here to exploit them. I was here to celebrate 70 years of Veselka and kind of show how Tom and Jason and Volodymyr, their intent has all been consistent over 70 years. It's to raise everyone up. But in particular, Volodymyr's goal was to make this a place for Ukrainians. And now with the war, it seemed to find that focus again. And so the movie really details the story of the first year of the war, as told through some of the staff. And I like to tell people it's not a war movie. The war is a catalyst, but it's not a war movie. If anything, this movie is an antidote to war. I hope that people come out of these screenings feeling like there's a way that we all can be helpful, not only in times of war, but just remind people to love their neighbor, pay it forward. It's simple things like that Tom and Jason have been doing for decades, and is kind of the role of Veselka over the decades that keeps a community tight knit and supported. And by the way, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask at any time. I don't know if there's a way for me to see them. All right, let's see.
If you click the
Yeah,
chat button there, and if
yeah, I
anybody
see
writes a
there's
question in the chat.
4, I think. Let's see. Yeah, so if there's any questions, feel free to ask, or William, if you have any questions.
So how long did it take you to do the whole production?
So we started on the 11th day of the war, and our true final day of production was on the 1-year commemoration of the war. So, as I was editing the movie kind of piecemeal throughout that first year, I came to a realization that this is what the movie was. It was looking at 1 year, a very encapsulated story. Ironically, that's what ended up happening with my previous documentary too. And it wasn't like I pushed this one into that same format, but for whatever reason, that's becoming a thread in my feature docs so far. So maybe the third one will have the same the same concept. But it is interesting to see sometimes in almost like a scientific way of like what kind of change can happen in a very specific amount of time. And what's amazing about this story is that you see lives changed for the good and the bad in kind of a real time documentation.
We have one question here. How did you get David Duchovny to participate and be the narrator?
So Tom and Jason and I proposed to them this idea of someone should narrate the story. I came from a film school way of thinking of you don't add narration unless you really need it. And I was trying to make a story where we didn't have a lot of interviews. I didn't want to be like the Ken Burns documentary, but there was a point with Act One where I realized early on there was so much rich history and layers to the story that to establish where we've been in the early part of the history, there had to be interviews. But then once we get to like the present future aspects of like Act Two, Act Three, interviews drop off. And that's where a narrator became vital. And I always said to Tom and Jason, we were all in agreement that it was important that whoever the narrator was, they were speaking from a place of experience and love of Veselka. It wasn't like they were just reading my words on a page. Like this was something real to them. And David became the no-brainer in part because Tom and his wife had interactions with David's mom over the years. David had actually filmed an independent feature in Veselka a few decades ago. Maybe it was like early 90s. And so there are like all these connective tissues back to David. And he lived on 11th Street and 2nd Avenue. So talk about somebody who saw the evolution of Veselka firsthand. It would be David Duchovny. And he was wonderful. I mean, he came right on board. I went out to Santa Monica and record with him, and he could not have been more generous. He said to me, "I'm here for your movie and this story, and whatever you need, you do not hesitate. I have no ego. I'm here for the movie." And that's rare in the industry. So it's been a delight to have him in the movie and now his support as we go out into the world.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, I do like this question. Can you talk a little bit about the title? It's a very beautiful title. How did you come up with it? Is there a particular meaning behind it?
Sure. So Veselka means rainbow when translated from Ukrainian. And that's what Vladimir had named the storefront. And I think most people, don't think to look it up. They just think, oh, Veselka. Okay, it's an interesting word, Veselka. And I worked with a singer-songwriter from Toronto, Morgan Clamp, who I worked with on a previous documentary. And I knew I want him involved in some aspect of like a music track in the movie. And I pitched him the early concept I had for the documentary before like I kind of knew where it was going to end up. And he wrote this anthem that he titled On the Corner at the Center of the World. And I loved it. I just thought, wow, that is a great like anthem and title, and the song was beautiful. And then as I started to make the movie more and more, I started to go, oh my gosh, like this song doesn't necessarily feel like it's appropriate for this movie it has like an East meets West, like New York jazz sound, but then it also has like this kind of folk Ukraine sound too. And it's a beautiful hybrid. But I'm like, where do I put this pop song? And then something happened. It's like the movie evolves and when we were close to wrapping up the edit, I was summing up some things that have happened in the last year. There's title cards at the very end that sum up the second year of the war and at Veselka. And there's a last statement that I put up that said, and I don't want to give anything away from the story, but something doesn't occur and the restaurant is open for all to gather. The emphasis was on the all to gather and enjoy one another in the restaurant. and his song being an anthem about being able to come together. It doesn't matter who you are, but you can come to this corner at the center of the world and share food and love and conversation, it's a very universal song. I was like, oh, it should go right in the end credits. And I think it in the 3 screenings we've had, people have absolutely loved it and come up to me and asked, what it was. But the title came out of that track. And I just added the rainbow on the front of it. So it's the rainbow on the corner at the center of the world.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Now, the film is being released on the 23rd of this month.
Yes.
And
So
is it going to be shown in any other cities or only here in New York?
so we're getting a fairly wide release. So yes, we open on February 23rd. It runs for at least a week at Village East across the avenue from Veselka. And then we're also in Los Angeles at the Laemmle NoHo in North Hollywood, the same time period. Washington, D.C., we're going to be at the Regal Gallery Place. And in New Jersey, we're going to be at the Bernardsville Cinema 3. And then we start going even wider in March and April. So in March 20th, we're going to be a week in Boulder, Colorado. And then we have a special event at the Siskel Center in Chicago on April 8th, which is kind of a one-off event. And then the following weekend, we're at the Ted Rogers Hot Doc Cinema in Toronto for a handful of days, starting on, I think, the 12th of April. And if you ever want to see updates on where we're going to be, because this stuff kind of happens very quickly, especially as you get reviews that are positive, like theaters come and say, oh, let's program you. So for updates, just go to Veselka Movie, which is on all our social media. That's our handle for everything. And then you can also go to the Veselka restaurant website, which is veselka.com. And there'll be updates there as well. Oh, and actually one more big release, which is the most amazing and wonderful thing. I made a deal last week. We're going to be starting February 22nd through the 28th, 1 week. We're going to be in 6 cinemas across Ukraine through the Planeta Kino chain of cinemas. So we'll be in Lviv, Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa. I think that's all the cities, but then we're in like 2 cinemas in Kiev and Lviv, I think.
And will the film be shown any longer than a week here in New York?
It's up to the support of you all and your friends and family. The first weekend is huge for an indie movie. So if we were to sell out shows, we already sold out our 7 o'clock show for Friday night, the 23rd. So if we can sell out that, a bunch of major shows during that opening weekend, as of that Monday morning, they would announce an extension to the second week. So, please tell friends, please, everyone here, please try to go. I mean, this is a true labor of love, and it's true indie cinema. There's no studio behind this. This is just a lot of blood, sweat, and tears of people that care deeply for this place and their story.
And of course, not wanting to ask for any spoilers or anything, but what were some of the most fun things to film, and what were some of the most difficult?
Um, fun is a hard one to find because honestly, the whole year had this cloud over it. I think when it was fun was I don't want to give away that certain subjects go through, personalities and people in the movie go through some pretty serious stuff. And when I would see them smile, that was the fun for me. It was like, oh, this person is suddenly opening up, and they're like, the war for a brief moment doesn't seem, it's like they could put it aside for a minute, even though it's always looming over them and their family. Um, Anytime we could kind of like take those people out of the restaurant, there's a few times in the movie where we go to other places and it's not in the restaurant. I felt, again, it was not fun for me from like a production point of view. I just liked seeing these people that I've grown to love and feel like family with kind of like just take a break, get away from the office, so to speak. And that was fun for me. The biggest challenges was just, they always say in the film industry, you don't film on water, you don't film with animals, try not to make movies like with children. Like those are the challenge spots in cinema. I'm adding a fourth, which is do not film in a popular, busy restaurant because it's just as bad as making Jaws on the ocean. And Tom and Jason were incredible, and the staff was incredible. They were so like okay with us being there, but we shot like 25 days across a year, and everyone was always very happy to see us. But I felt terrible because, while it's a very big open restaurant, our cameras with lenses could be like this, and we had on average two and sometimes three. And when that would occur, it's like you want to be so mindful of their operation. You don't want to get in the way. Now go into the kitchen downstairs in the basement, and when you see it in the movie, it's very narrow. That's part of the premise. We talk about a potential renovation, and talk about a game of Jenga, like trying to figure out which crew member can go where and allow everyone to still do their work. It was a constant challenge, and I think the end result is a powerful one, a visceral one. But it was a chat. There were challenges without a doubt.
And of course, you probably ended up filming an enormous amount that eventually didn't make it now into the final cut. So how did you decide to what to include and develop the narrative around what you decided to keep?
Good, that's a great question. So interestingly, even though yes, we probably shot like 150 hours of footage or something, yeah, even though it was that much, the reality is the little buckets of like each scene that we shot, they're all in there. Like there was nothing that was just jettisoned. I think there was only one moment on one day where someone stopped by and we ended up cutting that person out. There was interviews we didn't use, and I'll kind of backdoor into why I didn't use a lot of those. Um, as I said earlier, my whole goal and idea with this movie was always to have the central theme of fathers and sons. And again, starting with the relationships with Volodymyr and Tom, and Volodymyr and his grandson Jason. And then when Tom takes over and Volodymyr passes away, Tom and Jason. And then when the war starts, how Tom and Jason become surrogate dads to a lot of the staff. And it's a real character study in just the evolution of how fathers and sons interact and reconnect over time, which was an important story to me. I love my dad dearly, but we had our challenges when I was in my late 20s and 30s, and he kind of tough loved me and wanted me to get to certain places in my life, but he didn't handhold me. It was tough love. And I was always bothered by that through my 20s and 30s. But then I realized there was a point where I was like, oh, I see what he's doing here. Like there is a goal here. Like he loves me. It's just he has a plan for me, a vision I don't even see yet. And that's the complexity, I think, of fathers and sons. And so I explore that with Tom and Jason, and then some of these surrogate relationships. So if it didn't service that, I would jettison it. And the interviews that I filmed, but I didn't use a lot of, were actually really helpful in just kind of gaining information about either the history of the restaurant or the dynamics between people. But at the end of the day, I realized the people that really should be narrating this, besides David Duchovny, if there's anyone that's going to be telling the story on camera in an interview form, it should be Tom and Jason as father and son. And then there's some kind of like ancillary people that pop in quickly, but like they are the driving force of act one when you're seeing interviews. And then act two and three, it's very cinema verite. It's like all the interviews drop away. The Ken Burns vibe is gone. And then you're really living in the moment as the war is evolving across a year.
We have one question that came in, and you mentioned learning history of Veselka through some of these interviews. Beyond it just changing from a store to a restaurant, did you learn how else it changed over the decades of its existence?
Yeah, I mean, um, there's so many dynamics to it, and I don't want to give too much away, but there is a how would I put it? I don't know if ironic is the right word. But when Tom, Tom is like, red-blooded American boy, marries Volodimir's daughter, who's 100% Ukrainian. And as he says in the movie, he always, he thought Volodymyr had envisioned a Ukrainian son. So as Tom says, he went for the second best thing, a good American son and or son-in-law. And he always says, I wasn't Ukrainian, but I was Ukrainian by persuasion. And by working in the restaurant with Volodymyr and taking it over upon his passing and managing it after he passed, the community wasn't really super supportive of him. And he had to figure out what this place needed to be to survive. And the movie really details some of those challenges and the things he did to keep it afloat, to then build it to what it is now, which, as he says in the movie, it's now a food factory. It started as a newspaper stand candy store with a couple Ukrainian dishes, then becomes kind of a hybrid diner, Eastern European, Ukrainian, smaller restaurant, and then it becomes a 24-hour food factory. So you'll see all that in Act One. We break it down nicely.
Now, you've talked about the main narrative being focused around fathers and sons,
Mhm.
but what kind of does the immigrant story play in your documentary?
Yeah, again, it comes back to this idea of some of the staff whose family members are in Ukraine during the war, at least this first year we focused on. The employees are torn. There's one in particular who has his foot ready to get back on the plane to fight in the war, and he's very torn because he's lost so many of his friends because they fought on the front line and died. So he doesn't feel comfortable being here or being happy because they're there fighting a war. And so, Jason, as the current owner, kind of steps in to father him and like teach him, like, no, we can do things from here. You don't have to have a gun to solve this. Like, we'll do stuff together here. And then there's other employees that both Jason and Tom embrace and help to try to bring family over and or just support them in lieu of their biological father who's, a world away. So yeah, you're just kind of seeing this like fatherly advice, fatherly love that kind of comes through. I think they'd be this way even if there wasn't a war. But given that there is a war and these people's families are displaced, they kind of spring into action to give them what they're missing, and which in this case is a father.
And can you expand a little bit on your own personal relationship with Veselka? How has your relationship evolved with it? And someone has also asked what your favorite meal is at it too.
Yeah, no. So when I went to NYU Film School, and I got a good friend of mine who actually is a crew member on the documentary. He always used to tell me when I was at NYU, Mike, you always go to your same pizza places or Italian or Mexican or Chinese. You got to go to Veselka, great Ukrainian, great Eastern European. He'd said this to me for a few years, and then finally one day we went. And I loved it. And then for the 20 years until meeting Tom and Jason, I was we would go play cards at midnight in the back corner and have our challah toast and coffee and just kind of chill out and have a very comfortable time. My evolution with the restaurant has been, I have a full understanding of why it succeeded over 70 years, and other restaurants, like other Ukrainian restaurants in particular, disappeared. And it might sound hokey, but it's the people. It honestly is. And I think it's not just the people that own it and operate it. I think it's the community. Like, I said this to Tom and Jason the first time we met. I said, this is a movie about mutual feeding. This is like you feed them, but the community feeds you too. And it's like everybody's there for each other. Like everybody's looking out for one another's backs. I don't know if that's the case with so many restaurants. I really feel like people would go to the end of the earth for Tom and Jason if they needed something. Like, And I just saw so much goodwill over the last 2 years, unlike anything I've ever seen at any other restaurant I've frequented throughout my life. And it all comes from with Tom, Jason, the Birchard family as a whole who's involved in this. It's just a very authentic sense of love for people, for food, for the neighborhood. It's nice. It's a very special thing. Oh, and my favorite dish.
Yeah, your favorite.
That's hard. Started off really simple. It was like the most non-Ukrainian thing on there was the chicken cutlet. I would get that always. But now I love the stuffed cabbage with the tomato sauce. I never ate beets before having their borscht here, and now I tell everyone, look, if you hate beets, have the borscht. You won't even know there's beets in it. It's so good. It's amazing. And of course, vareniki or pierogi. Yeah, no, I ate before we did this because I'm right above the restaurant right now, so I had to stop in and have my matzo ball soup as well.
Now, of course, the goal is to get the word out about the movie, but what do you hope will be the long-term impact and legacy of it?
There's a moment in the movie you can see if people have seen the trailer. There's a moment where Mayor Adams stops by, and on that day, um, I think his heart was in the right place, but there was too much messaging going on. And he even says, like when he gets there, he's like, we're gonna do a duality today. We're gonna try to talk about the pandemic, and we're also gonna talk about getting people back into restaurants, and we're also gonna talk about this war that's going on in Ukraine. And he's torn in many different directions, and you see it in real time. And Jason comments in that moment, like after the fact, he says, I think as the mayor, you have to have really big ears. Like, I don't know what he was paying attention to. And I think what comes out of this movie is all of us combined, we have to stop this focus on getting the answers from either local or national government figures or the media. It's like Tom and Jason are a symbol of the easy answer, right? The people on the corner that just do good things for people. If we all just say, hey, we're going to pay it forward to somebody today, again, might sound hokey, but it works. I mean, I've seen in real time the things that they have done, just in they've done so many different forms of fundraising. One of their big initiatives was selling borscht and giving all the profits of the borscht to a nonprofit they've been working with for like a decade called Razum. And they raised in year one, I think like $300,000 just in borscht sales. And they continued that for a little bit, I think, into the last year, but they've moved on to different forms of initiatives with like vareniki bowls and different things like that. I mean, that's a very simple gesture or approach to solving a bigger problem. Somebody, again, I don't want to give too much away, but people come to the restaurant in Act Two from Ukraine. It's kind of a very central moment and in the movie. And one of the people who's never been to New York City or the United States before says, Jason asked them, do you get the sense that Americans are supportive? And keep in mind, this is like 6 months into the war, 7 months into the war. And he says, absolutely. But it goes beyond getting ammunition and money. He's like, we just feel this love from Americans. And he said, you giving us vareniki right now means the world to us. They didn't want money. They didn't want ammunition. He's like, just give us, we feel love just by this act. And I think it's a very powerful moment in the movie because I think a lot of times, like the government right now is just talking about money and ammunition. We can solve this thing other ways too, right? Or help. It might not be a full solution, but we can help people through very kind of simple ways of paying it forward and just showing love. So I hope people take away that we can provide change individually. And we don't need our local or national leaders to lean on for that.
Yeah, another question pop in here. Did you explore Veselka's relationship with any of the other East European restaurants and the other East European communities in the East Village?
So that was something I really wanted to do initially. And then there was this realization that you could have told this movie a million different ways, this story a million different ways. And I wanted to do a little bit more of a history of the neighborhood thing, but unfortunately, the movie kind of you'll hear filmmakers say this all the time, and it seems like a cliche, but it is because it's true. The movie tells you what it wants to be, and you start to realize where things are kind of lagging, or like it's interesting, but it's like, why is this in this story? And that component was starting to feel that way. So to your earlier question about like cutting room floor, that was a concept I wanted to celebrate the neighborhood more, but it becomes a real more like interpersonal character study than it is necessarily about the history and interrelationship with other restaurants. So we keep it more within the restaurant than anything else.
And since right now it's still a relatively limited release in theaters, for those who may not get a chance to see it in theater, are there any plans for it to go onto a streaming service? And of course, tangible media is conking out, but any kind of plan for a DVD, Blu-ray release that would maybe include some of those interviews that were not included in the main documentary and other special features?
Yes to the Blu-ray. We'll probably try to do that as soon as we're on a streamer. We're out to some streamers right now. I was saying this to Jason recently that making indie movies is like playing a chess game, but we'll win the chess game. And part of that game is um, just not that you have an opponent per se, but you absolutely there's different moves you have to make to checkmate first. And one of those things as an indie movie is try to do a festival run and then try to get a theatrical. Now, in our case, because of the war being an aspect of this story, I thought it was very important that we not wait for Tribeca. Obviously, going to Tribeca would have been the slam dunk that would have made all the sense in the world. Who knows what the sentiment is going to be about the war in June, July? That's the problem. At that point, Tribeca might go, well, it's artfully done, but nobody wants to hear about this now. And it's terrible, but that is the truth of the industry, which I don't agree with. I think that's the point of documentary. Stories live on, right? They're not there for one little moment. It's like, no, a documentary can be watched at any time and it has value in some way. And sometimes it has more value with time. But the audience, like streaming services, they're very in the now. So, I didn't know that what's happening right now with, the House and the Senate was going to happen. I couldn't have predicted this 2, 3 months ago, but I kind of knew like we really should work towards getting this out around this 2-year commemoration of the war, which is February 24th, and we come out on the 23rd. So, the hope is that the reviewers absolutely love it next week. And as a result of that, that can oftentimes trigger a sale to the streamers. And they're just kind of watching in the wings, waiting to see they want validation from the public. So, it's so important for all of you here and any friends and family you think would be interested in this to please go to the cinema. Please go on social media. And if you did love it, like write about it. If you don't like it, don't tell anyone you didn't like it. Keep it to yourself. But yeah, any kind of support will be really helpful in just keeping the movie alive because the industry has a real short memory with stuff like this, unfortunately.
Doesn't look like there are any more questions from the audience, but are there any final thoughts that you would like to share to wrap up this evening?
If you haven't been to Veselka, please go experience it for yourself. I think if you're planning on going to the movie, I think you'll enjoy the movie even more having gone. I think this is a very unique place in New York City and anywhere in the world. And I hope that the story that I've created not only honors their 70-year history, but also just makes people think about how they can pay it forward and be helpful to others and make change in kind of unexpected and sometimes simple ways, but still elicit change. Um, yeah, I'm just so proud and honored to be the guy shepherding their story. As I said to somebody earlier today, I think, they've had directors coming in this restaurant for 70 years. I'm sure every other year there's somebody, of name or note pitching them an idea to tell their story. I can't be the first guy, right? So the fact that they felt comfortable with me and they saw and understood what I wanted to do with it, I mean, it means the world to me to be that guy. And as I said earlier to them today, I'll be thanking them the rest of my life for being included in their story. It's very, very special to me.
We have one last minute question, but do you know
Sure.
if Veselka ships any of their products? Are you able to order products from them?
They do. I don't know if they started it before the pandemic, for it was kind of like in the pandemic, but they have national shipping, and you can send anywhere in the United States, to my knowledge. And yeah, it's very, very popular. And they just opened up, or they're opening up, a commissary in Brooklyn as well. So they have Ninth Street, they have Grand Central, they have a little setup there, Grand Central, which just opened. And then the Brooklyn commissary, from my understanding, is going to kind of service everything and also be their center for national shipping. So yeah, I mean, any friends or family that end up seeing this movie outside of New York, in our Boulder, Colorado screenings, Toronto, well, I don't know if they go to Toronto, but Chicago, LA, DC, Jersey, yeah, they can all have some Veselka, at home the night of or the day after they see it in the theater.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for sharing your evening with us and this
Thank you, Will.
wonderful conversation. Wishing you a huge success with your film. We're all keeping our fingers crossed. Everyone, please go out and see the film if you can. Order some pierogies, and borscht beets is good if you have high blood pressure. So that's
Yeah,
already a benefit right there, other than being delicious. But thank you again, Michael. Thank
my
you
pleasure.
again, everyone, for joining us this evening. Wishing you a wonderful Friday evening and a wonderful long weekend. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.